Hello, welcome to Post Colonial Space. I'm Masood Raja, and what follows is an excerpted clip from one of my longer webinars. So what I've decided is that sometimes when people ask really interesting questions, I will pull out that particular part of a webinar and make it available to you as a short clip so that if you don't have time to watch a 1-hour webinar, you can at least watch and listen to the brief exchanges that I usually have with people who attend my webinars. So here is one such clip from a recent webinar. I hope you enjoy it. Why is Conrad worried of offending the British by critiquing Belgian colonialism? Was he worried of being perceived to be critiquing colonialism in general, which would have... Well, yes. I mean, think of it when you read carefully. There is a serious indictment of this idea that people can go and capture the empty spaces in the world. There is a certain critique of general colonialism itself. But by the time he's writing the novel, he's not yet a British citizen. And also, and this comes from other people's reading his letters and writing about it, he's also very unsure of his own status in England, right? He's an immigrant. So all of this, one could guess, that would make him very cautious to come across as doing a blanket critique of colonialism. That's why you see, even when Marlowe makes fun of colonialism itself, he kind of does it in a very subtle way. I mean, on one hand, he's saying all these empty places in the world on the map, right? He makes fun of the ants who think he's going to bring the light to the so-called heathens. But on the other hand, he's juxtaposing that with this monstrosity that is happening in Congo, right? And as you read carefully, you will see it's that juxtaposition which kind of salvages British colonialism, but not by not saying too much about it, but by also particularizing this evil form of colonialism. Now, coming from one of the scholars on Leopold II, King Leopold II of Belgium, who owned Congo as his own territory after the scramble for Africa, what ends up happening in African studies is also that people make Leopold II as this standard for terrible colonialism. And what that ends up happening is, and the book is called King Leopold's Ghost. What ends up happening is that in politics, if you can compare yourself to what Leopold did and you're not that bad, you can somehow argue that your form of colonialism is better. So he becomes this terrible example of what not to do, but anything less than that becomes kind of acceptable. And we do that in real life too. If you really have encountered people who do bad things, they always compare their actions to someone even more terrible, and it's like, I'm not as bad as that, so that means I might be good. That's exactly what he's doing in the novel too. In my opinion, there is no good colonialism. What I'm saying is, within the context of the novel, and as we read it, I'll point to it. Remember that passage in the novel, he says, what saves us is the idea, something that you bow down to. So what he's trying to do is set up this kind of binary structure and efficiency. So within the novel, what comes across is that, okay, if you have an idea that backs it up, and if the system is efficient and is governed properly, then maybe that is good. It doesn't say that it is good, but we can extrapolate from that. And then bad colonialism is what Marlowe is going to tell the story of, right? Where it's greed, governed by greed. There are no laws. There is no infrastructure being built. A lot of people who argue for for colonialism was a good thing, will tell you, well, the British came to India and they built roads and they built railway, and that means colonialism was a good thing, right? I always have a simple answer to that. People who think that colonialism was a good thing and it was good for India, I ask them an infrastructure question. Now, the British had India for more than 250 years as their territory. It was the territory of the Queen, right? Queen Victoria was the Queen Empress of India, right? So if in 1947, when the British leave, and India had immense wealth, okay, it wasn't a poor country. It underwrote so much of England's own progress with its resources. So my question is simple. If they treated India exactly the same way as they treated their own mother country, then infrastructurally and in terms of knowledge and systems, India would have been at the same place where England was. So let's not even apply it to the whole Indian nation, which was huge. New Delhi was the capital of India, and London was the capital of England. If the British want to claim that we did great things in India and we developed it, the standard, infrastructural standard of New Delhi should have been the same as that of London. It's because India also had the resources to do it, but it wasn't. So that means that infrastructurally the colonies remained way poorer than the mother countries. And it's a historical fact that most of the wealth from the colonies was transferred to the so-called mother countries. So that argument doesn't suffice. There's a beautiful book by the Indian writer and politician Shashi Tharoor, which basically tells you, quantifies how many trillions of pounds of Indian wealth went to England. A good question. Today we critique the novel, we come across many secondary meanings. I was wondering what Conrad's original intent in writing, was it to just, well, probably not. No, the novel was highly intentional, okay? Conrad didn't just sit in London and write the novel. No, he actually worked there as a steamboat captain, went up the river, kept copious notes, right, of his journey. He went there to write a novel about Congo. He also met Roger Casement, the Irish diplomat who was then writing a report about atrocities in Congo. We know that that's part of a historical fact. So Conrad went there to write a novel about Congo, but also to write a novel that tells the stories of what's happening in Congo. There is no doubt about that. It was highly intentional. Did he go there to justify colonialism? Probably not. And especially not the colonialism in Congo. But within the novel, we do see, through Marlowe's words, the juxtaposition of what's happening in Congo to a more competent and efficient system, which is, of course, the British colonialism. So that probably was placed in there intentionally as this juxtaposition, right? And does it justify colonialism? I don't think so, because Marlowe is also deeply ironic. But it does create this dichotomy that there is this kind of colonialism, which is terrible, but then there is this more efficient one, which others do, obviously the English. Right? And this is a really good question also, because over a period, what it teaches us is that as the knowledge develops, as the cultural ways of looking at literary texts develop, the same novel could have been read differently 80 years ago. We now read it differently because we bring to it our own expectations of a good novel, right? And we problematize the previous readings of the novel. So one way of looking at it is, for example, even now there are scholars who will just read the novel as an aesthetic object, right? They just say, we're going to look at the language and see how suspense is created and how this. They are not concerned with the politics or what the novel does in the world. Then there are people like me, other scholars, African-American scholars, who will go and read the novel, not in terms of how it is managed and how it is written, but what does it do in the world if we read it uncritically. So they will then say, well, this story normalizes this view of Africans. It normalizes this view of women, right? So what they are then emphasizing is not necessarily what's in the book and how it is put together, but what is the impact of a book. So they are acknowledging then that books have an impact on our consciousness. And if read uncritically, and if something is offered as repeatedly as a trope, then that becomes a person's way of looking at that part of the world. And think of it this way: how many times, if you meet someone from Africa, right, who's actually from Africa, most of the times the first question the people ask is about African wildlife. No one really asks them, okay, how big is your hometown? What kind of industry exists there? The reason people ask that question is because the images of Africa that are still thrown at us are of the Serengeti and of the elephants and the lion prides. Very rarely do we see a documentary about Africa that says, here is a great city, from Senegal. Here is a great city called Nairobi. Here are the subcultures of Nairobi. So thank you so much for watching or listening to this brief clip. If you are interested in the longer version, the link will be in the description and you can watch the whole webinar. Thank you so much for your support. And as always, if you have any questions, any concerns, you can always post them in the comments and I'll be happy to respond to them. If you have a moment and if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please do so now so that you get timely notifications of whatever is happening on this channel. Thank you for your support. Stay safe, and as always, from me to you, peace and love.